Hey, this week on the 167, we're starting our new series, Foundations, talking about living stones. Welcome to the 167. Welcome to the 167. I'm here with Pastor Rick George.
Good morning.
Taking time out of a busy week, trying to seal things up at the new building. We're throwing sod down. We're planting trees.
I know it looks different.
I know that sod. I'm telling you, it's like when you put paint on the walls. You know, it's like you're like, I don't know about this, and then you just put a little mud, a little paint, and all of a sudden it looks like a house.
So, all right, I wasn't going to say this, but I'm really tempted to set a lawn chair out there in the parking lot and say, "Get off my grass!"
Yes,
you know, get that old man vibe going. Get off the grass! Quit walking across the grass! Get on the sidewalk.
I mean, if you want, we can just put we'll get one of those rickety old signs and just spray paint. Keep off the grass.
So, you never knew that grass was so beautiful until it goes down and covers up all that dirt, and then you're like, yeah, don't be walking on that.
You never knew grass is so beautiful until you get the bill for sod.
Yeah,
like,
it is beautiful.
Nobody touch it. We're going to cut it with scissors. So if you want to join our deacons team to cut the grass with scissors,
absolutely,
you can email Pastor Rick at... So welcome back to the 167. Like I said, it's a busy time here at the church, so I appreciate taking time out to bless our listeners. So this week, we're continuing our foundation series because it's all about stones. I'm talking about living stones. This week, we talked about cornerstones. This coming week, you're going to be talking about...
Getting stoned?
Yes.
Oh, no. That's a different podcast that I do.
How to do that. Well, what happens is you go to ancient Judea and you run your mouth, and then Stephen...
Yeah.
Poor Stephen.
Well, I was thinking about a different kind of stone, but
well, that's a
all
Colorado
right.
trip. That's a little bit easier.
Where's this podcast going?
That's just Missouri.
Hey, it's been a long week when Pastor starts going off the rails, so...
I never thought Kansas would be classier than Missouri until Missouri passed the law. It's just like, everybody gets stoned.
So, next week, now you trip me because I've already planned and preached one sermon for a couple of weeks from now, and I'm getting ready to preach the second sermon tomorrow. So I'm going to preach two sermons before I preach the end of, it's crazy.
Right, because this week we are live in person at New Life Community Church, and the 2 weeks after we are online only. Catch us at YouTube and on Facebook.
Yeah, and so I'm writing and preaching sermons for 2 and 3 weeks from now, and I haven't preached the sermon that I'm going to preach this week yet.
Well, that's how I felt the past 2 weeks because we boxed that up. Like I preached those two sermons, we put it online, and then I was like, we got to preach them live, and I'm like, well, I've already preached this twice.
Yeah, so it's a little bit like getting the cart in front of the horse. I'm like, wait a minute, didn't we already cover this? Oh, no, we haven't. So
year, tell me the year.
Yeah.
Like what?
So,
I feel like we're in a time travel movie.
So anyway, I'll be jumping in this week in week 3 of the series, and then week 4 will be online, and then week 1 of the new series will be online, and then we're in person.
And which stone is this week coming up? Was it Standing Stones or was it the other one?
No, it's Standing Stones. The next one is Precious Stones.
Precious Stones.
That's the 4th one. So
Please
this week is about proclaiming the excellencies as these stones of remembrance. When you remember what God has done, and then you proclaim His testimony or your testimony of His excellence. And so that's this week.
You do Precious Stones. Do you do a Gollum impression?
No.
They're precious.
I don't know what that is.
It's Lord of the Rings, man.
Never seen it.
It's a book. No.
Well, whatever.
All right. So join us next week when Pastor Rick and I are going to sit down and watch the extended versions, the 4-hour apiece, three movie version of Lord of the Rings. It'll be the best 12 hours of your life.
So for my people who have never seen Lord of the Rings, comment or
put a like in the comments.
Put a like, something to say, hey, I'm with you. I've never seen it either.
And I will mock you mercilessly.
All right.
So this week we talked about foundations. And so I was trying to kind of lay the groundwork and talk to people about what is the foundation in your life versus what are you just building with, right? So it was kind of a litmus test of going, what are you actually building your life on or around versus this is incorporated into my life in some way. Yeah. And so when you were thinking about that, or if I ask you this question, how would you tell our listeners if they're like, well, I don't know exactly what my foundation is. How do we find that?
So there is a distinct difference between what you use for your foundation and then what you use as building material for the rest of the building. So sometimes, using materials that aren't like they're not the big stones for the foundation, they're smaller stones or they're different kinds of materials. It works fine in the building itself.
Right.
Right. At some point, it can't be the majority of it, nor can it be the foundation. Okay. So that foundation is the thing that everything else is built on. Right. So keep that in mind. So how do you know what the foundation is? It's what everything else is built on. So in a practical sense, like there are people, whether they want to admit it or not, that have foundations that are very weak. They're built on things that are not stone, that are not things that will sustain them. Things like Chiefs football. I'll just throw that out there.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So
Stay tuned.
So how do you know that that's a foundation? It's when you say, well, I'm not coming to church on Sunday. The Chiefs are playing at that. So you're building your life around or on a thing. So last week, what was the foundation? It was the Chiefs. And some people, like in years past, it's not so much now because you can just YouTube it or watch it on any number of things, and you can binge watch things on Netflix.
I still say TiVo, even though I'm pretty sure that hasn't been a thing for forever.
But back in the day, that's how you know you're an old person But people would say, "Oh no, we can't do that on Tuesday night because Tuesday night that's when Dallas is on or whatever the show was." Or it's like,
maybe your show of choice.
Yeah, and so that's the foundation that you're building on is that thing. So what is it that says it takes precedence over everything else? That's your foundation.
Well, and when you think about it, and like I said, that was when I was reading that passage, and it talks about the cornerstone bearing the weight. And I was like, oh, that's so good because it's everything that's far enough down. Like even, let's not even say the foundation, but like that first layer of brick that you're laying, that is holding significantly more weight than the top layer of brick. And so it's like, I was in my head picturing that when you said like, okay, so, I'm watching Chiefs football. Okay, well, if the Chiefs lose, are you going to throw something and, drink too much and yell at your kids? Like how much does that affect you? Or do you just go, well, the Chiefs lost, or like you can enjoy a football game, but like you said, what are you saying no to? How much time? Because like you and I both know there are people that spend, almost 40 hours a week watching football or watching sports to try and track their teams. And that's time that you're saying no to family time. It's time you're saying no to work, or it's time you're saying no to Jesus.
Yeah. So some people, their foundation is their job, right? So is having a job a bad thing? No, it's a great thing. If you don't have one, you should get one.
Paul says you don't work, you don't eat.
Yeah. So a job in your career, that's a really important part of your life. But if that's your foundation, then if you lose your job, then you have no worth, you have no value, everything crumbles, and I'm
you
worthless.
Sink into depression.
So it doesn't mean that the job or your career is not important. It just can't be your foundation. Is loving your kids and devoting your life to your kids a bad thing? No. But if that becomes your foundation and you say, my kids are my world, like they're everything.
Right.
Well, they're going to grow up and they're going to move out, and then you're going to be devastated, and then everything crumbles because, well, now I have nothing.
Well, there are crazy statistics about that, about marriage couples who, once their kids move out, divorce rates go up because that was what the relationship was built on, and that's what their lives were built on, and now that's no longer there.
Yeah, so
they've lost connection.
Exactly. So is watching the Chiefs play football a bad thing? No. But for some people, it does become your foundation, and it's everything. And then when they lose, it's
your
devastating.
Life crumbles. Yeah.
Just an interesting little thing to do next time the Chiefs lose, and they probably will at some point.
Never again.
Yeah, the next time the Chiefs are playing and they lose, listen to what's happening outside. And you're probably going to hear some police sirens. It's just, it happens. I'm going to. Yeah, because there are assaults that happen. There are things.
Domestics.
Yeah, domestic violence goes up. People, like, it just, because they're emotional, they react, they're because that's everything was like, no, it's a game.
Right.
Right. But when it's your foundation, then it means a lot more. So
Yeah, and it's where you're spending your money, it's where you're spending your time. And I think it's fair to people to say, because a lot of people, our listeners, are going, well, it's not my foundation, I don't assault my wife on it. I'm like going, but I think you could view it as a sliding scale. If it's a 1-story house, where is that brick?
right.
Is it closer towards the bottom or is it closer towards the top? And do we just need to do some self-examination and do that? So this is kind of a funny thing that we discovered this week. But Carissa and I were actually talking to a younger couple, and they were talking about boundaries, and they asked us, how did you guys maintain good boundaries when you were dating? Basically, how do we not end up in a car?
Right.
And,
Yeah.
And it was funny because I just laughed, and Carissa was like, what? And I said, I had a raid time. And she was like, a what? And I was like, I had a World of Warcraft. And she goes, oh my gosh, that's correct. I had a set time that I played video games with my friends, at 9 p.m. So the date had to be over and I had to be back. But I'm like, that was a thing where it's I know that sports gets picked on, but I'm going, even people that are, nerds like myself, it was I spent a bunch of time farming imaginary vegetables so that I could make imaginary potions so that I could take an imaginary character into an imaginary dungeon on my computer at 9 o'clock at night for 2 to 3 hours and try and kill imaginary dragons. And I'm going, how much time and it was terrible because in your video games, it will tell you how much time that you have spent logged in. And I'm going, so you could say, oh, I'm just going to do a raid, but it wasn't a raid. It was the prep time and the crafting time and all those things. And so we don't want to, just pick on sports and stuff, but I'm going, there are so many things in our life that can start to become, even if it's not the foundation, but giant bricks in your life that, looking back on that, I'm going, that probably shouldn't have even been important in my life.
Yeah. So what are the things that your life kind of revolves around that starts to
what's your calendar wrap around?
Yeah. And those are things that are pretty substantial stones in your foundation. It may not be the entire foundation, but it is a significant stone within the foundation.
Yeah. So, the scripture here was, as you come to him, a living stone rejected by men, but in the sight of God, chosen and precious, you yourselves are like living stones are being built up as a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For it stands in Scripture, behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone, and that chosen and precious, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. And we talked a little bit this week about being put to shame is being let down, right? Where you go, Jesus is so sturdy, and then all of a sudden you get smacked by life, and then we go, well, see, Jesus faltered, he failed, and so what does it look like when Jesus is our foundation? How should that affect our doubt or our faith? Because I really think that was kind of what we were talking about with doubt is that moment where you go, God let me down. God's going to let me down.
Yeah. So what comes to my mind is that phrase or the statement that reality always
reasserts
itself. And so people can believe whatever they want. We all have a variety of different beliefs and understandings, and some of them are faulty, some of them are not. Right? But in the end, truth always reasserts itself at some point. And so when we hit a rough patch in life or something happens that we weren't planning on, then we have this tendency to then blame God or say that God failed us and that, I did this, but he didn't come through for me. And we go through those seasons, but I believe reality, right, the truth always reasserts itself if we're open to that, right? So I live in that for a minute and think he failed me. Is that true? No. Is he patient? Yes. So he's being patient. He has a plan. He's working with us. So in this area of our life that we're, having doubts and struggles and pity parties and blaming God, the truth never changes. And eventually it reasserts itself in our life and we get back to that place. But only if we have that foundation of like I know who God is, and right now it doesn't make sense, and I don't understand it, and I don't even like that part. And we go on this little journey, but eventually it reasserts itself. Another way that I typically will say to people about building your life on Christ is when those tragedies come and you start into a downward spiral. You ever been in a downward spiral?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. It's like, so again, I think everyone listening would say, oh, I understand what that looks like.
Yeah.
Where life was going good, something happened, and now it was bad. And then I did something that made it worse. And then somebody said something else and made it worse. And you start a downward spiral, right? So if you have a firm foundation, you will only spiral down to the foundation.
Ooh. Well,
Right.
hold on. Say that one more time.
So when you start spiraling down, you will only spiral as far as the foundation. So if you have a firm foundation,
That's so good.
when you start to plummet and the bricks start falling off the walls, it'll only go down to the foundation. You can rebuild from there. If you don't have a firm foundation, it's just an endless abyss, and you will continue to spiral and spiral and spiral. So that's why the foundation is important. That, yes, you may lose some things here and there, and this wall may crumble a little bit, but you can rebuild because it's got a firm foundation.
If you're going to send your friend a clip from this podcast, that's the clip.
There
I mean,
you
that's
go.
so good. And I mean, yeah, I mean, that's crazy good because that is really the gist of it is, we're not necessarily protected all the time. And so like when you're talking about that spiral, I think about that in our lives where I've shared that story multiple times for us and I really think about it. People don't plan for those things. Like if you're not in the word and you're not thinking things through, like, I had grandparents die or things like that, great grandparents die. But it wasn't until Chris and I lost, our first child in our miscarriage that we were like, oh, what do I believe about this? Like, is my child in heaven? Was it not really here? Was it, it's like, and, how do I get through this? Because I can sit here and say, it's easy to say Christians should just not grieve at all. Like, oh, they're in heaven. Like, who cares? And I'm like going, until you're in that moment and you know what it is to grieve somebody. And then it's like, oh, no. Grief is hard and you have to process it and you have to walk through it. But, if I didn't have any hope, if I didn't think that Jesus was real or heaven was real, I'm like, I don't know how I would have processed that.
Yeah. And, dealing with those things that just happen to us of no fault of our own, they're just life.
Yeah.
Right? Because we live in a fallen world and it's faulty and it's just jacked up, right? And things just happen.
Yeah, life's terrible enough. You also have an enemy out there that's trying to steal, kill, and destroy.
So, having that foundation to help deal with those things, like that's important. But let's not pretend like for most of us, we have a good foundation and then we decide, you know what, on this wall, I'm just going to do what I want. And I know I probably shouldn't build the wall here
Out of cheese.
yeah, but it's what I want to do. And then something happens and it's like, yeah, that was dumb. And this part of the wall comes crumbling down. Well, how far is it going to crumble? Well, just down to the foundation.
Yeah.
And every one of us builds parts of our house on or from stupidity or selfishness or ignorance. And we use faulty material and we do things. And sometimes life just happens. And sometimes we just do dumb things. In either case, if the foundation is solid, you can rebuild.
Well, and I really tapped into the wisdom of Aesop's fables for this week when I talk about the three little pigs.
Yep.
But I wanted to spend some time just talking, and maybe in that context of the three little pigs. The pig, which I said built his first house out of straw, which is really comfort and convenience. It went up easy, everything is soft and plush, and then you have the second pig that would just. I compared it to like building with wood. It was fashionable. It's like it's somewhat harder. It's nails and wood, but it's still like, look at these hardwood floors. It's fashionable, and
It's like these fancy walls we have here in the podcast studio. Like
Oh,
they
you're
are
gonna out me.
beautiful. They are beautiful, like hardwood, precise, put together. You can't hardly even.
it's all fake.
seeing the
Everybody's always asking me like, what room is that in the church? I'm like, we built that.
yeah,
But
it's smoke and mirrors.
yeah. But I mean, it is. It's like, you build a wooden house and it's like you can put your arm through that. Like, it's just like drywall. Drywall looks really sturdy and you just put your hand right through it. Yeah. And then you got the third pig who, if he's building out of brick, it was more expensive. It took longer. Like it was heavier. It was harder. Right. It had to let the brick set. Like, that would have been really hard work. And it probably took a lot longer than the other pigs. And it's like, why is it that, and we talked a little bit about, so when life comes, it's the same thing as the shifting sand. The big bad wolf blows your house over. Who do people run to? They run to the people in their life that they find to be stable. And so what do you think are some of the major challenges? Because you would think that churches all over America, every church, every Christ believer would have that brick house that everybody's going to run to in times of need.
That's a song, isn't it?
I know. The minute I said brick house, I saw your eyes light up.
Delete, edit, something like we're not going there.
The house of stone. There. But so like you'd think that most Christians would be in that situation, but they're not. And like we have people in congregations and even, like myself in different seasons that you get blown over every 5 minutes, and so what are some of the challenges or what are some of the ways that as Christ followers we can take the time to, let's say we got shaken down to our foundation. How do we rebuild with that brick?
Yeah. So my mind immediately went to a conversation I just had with someone from our church, oddly enough, about the building. Mm-hmm. Like
that's not really on people's minds.
I know. It's like that came out of nowhere. No, so they had an opportunity. Someone had invited them to go, and they were they went into the building and looked around, and they were commenting on the building, and they said it's very nice, and they looked around and said, we could tell where, you saved some money and some things were, and they were looking at it from a very, critical, like
bougie.
Yeah. Like where, like,
was it chandeliers?
Yeah. So, and so what I told them is we did save a lot of money. There's some things we did not make it the fanciest, most.
We didn't build a cathedral.
Yeah, it's not like the Taj Mahal. It's not super fancy. It is very functional, but there are parts of it that we spent extra money, and then there are parts that we save money. We call it value engineered out, right? Mm-hmm. So things that we wanted, we just value engineered it out of the plan because it wasn't worth the investment. But one of the things that we wanted to make sure was solid was the structure, the foundation, and the structure. We invested a lot of money in steel and in concrete and that. And then some of the other things, it's like, okay, they're water faucets in the bathroom. We didn't get the
automatic
bronze coated automatic. Like, could we have? Yes. But you got to turn the faucets on. Why? It saved money.
Right.
It's the same thing. It was one of those areas that we said, okay, when you think of all the faucets and then each one of those, it's another $100 or whatever for each faucet. And you start looking around, that's a couple $1,000s. Well, that couple of $1,000s could be used elsewhere. And so
it's not until you do a project like this that you're like, we spent how much money on toilet paper holders?
Yeah. And no, it's like crazy. And so in this conversation, I said, that's kind of life. That is life in a nutshell, that like if you have a firm foundation, then you get to pick and choose kind of where else you want to put nice things. But if you just say, I'm going to build my house out of toothpicks and, straw, and it's not that strong, but man, the inside is immaculate. Well, that's just dumb. And people do that all the time. My life is built on this faulty foundation, but look at all the stuff that I have that's going to just, in biblical terms, it's going to burn up. It's going to be of no value, and then you've lost everything. So.
Well, and I think about it in the sense, too, where you and I talked about this before, where I'd go to Mexico and build houses with the more ministries, and it's depressing because you literally pour a 10 by 20 slab. It's a 2-room house that you frame, and then you put up tar paper, chicken wire, and stucco. And it's like the people there are just blown away because they can, like, a lot of them will finish it themselves on the inside. They will, and for us, like, I would go to our team and say, hey, listen, for an extra $300, we can put glass windows and that like kind of open and shut, and then a front door on it so that it's lockable. Otherwise, it's just an entryway. And like 9 times out of 10, our group's just like, yeah, here's $20, and then we just buy those things. And so we fork out the money for it so they can lock it up. And like for those people, that is just an amazing, amazing thing for them. And then they're going to, like, we've gone back to sites and they've made it a home and they've done whatever, they've upgraded, they've dug stuff. And I'm going, but we provided the foundation for that. We provided the safety for that. And for them, that's enough. And I think that sometimes in our opulent society, we're focused more on comfort than we are structure. Like especially my generation's a very disposable generation. Like if it breaks, we just throw it away. Like you think about Chris's parents, they have a Maytag washer and dryer that they probably bought in like 1985, and it is still running in their basement, like no problem. And I'm like, we bought a washer and dryer maybe, like 5-6 years ago, and like I think I've had the repairman out 3 times because all the parts are plastic. It's, rubber bands and it's all these different things that are like, oh yeah, well, like we put a computer in it. And so now the computer chip has to be updated. And I'm like, how come hers runs? Like, it's like a wind up toy.
Yeah.
But it's made of metal. It's made of components that were supposed to be able
solid.
to repairable and last.
Yeah. And so, if I told you about my dad's freezer in the basement,
I don't think so.
Yeah. So my dad, and everybody listening, you probably know who OJ is. So he lives in the house that we moved to when I was in 3rd grade. Okay. So I was 10.
Longevity.
Yeah. I was almost 10. I had my 10th birthday shortly after we moved in. So I was 10 and I'm 61. Okay. So 51 years he's lived in that house. They bought it from some friends of theirs who had lived there for about 8 or 9 years. When they first moved in, they bought a deep freeze, an upright deep freeze, and they put it in the basement. The basement then got finished, and so you can't get that deep freeze out of the basement. Like it's just, it won't go up the stairwell, whatever. So they just left it with the house. It's still running. My dad still has food in that deep freeze, and it's 60 years old, never been repaired, never had anything. Like, it is running. Now, it's probably generating about $100 electric bill because it's got like a generator. But by golly, it runs and it's gonna make it.
It's like a diesel engine that you're.
It's like, Dad, like you've got 4 things stuck in there. Yeah, but that's a good freezer. And it's like, yeah, you know how much that's costing you? But it works,
right?
Because it was built to last. And the question is your life built to last, or is it disposable?
Well, and I think those are the things that it takes longer. It's harder work, and it's a lot of, like I said, I bring up that thing about my kids on Sunday morning where I'm like going, yes, our children, they don't get what they want a lot of the time because, we say, hey, we're going to go and do this as a family. And they're like, well, I just want to sit at home and play video games. I'm like, I don't care what you want. Yeah. And we just had an argument the other night where my daughter said something about that, where she said, she was misbehaving. And I said, well, you can't go over to your friend's house now. And she was like, but I want to go. And I'm like, that is not my number one priority. My number one priority is teaching you how to become a respectable adult.
I remember when I was a child and I would say things like, well, I want, and I would say whatever I wanted. And my mother, God bless her soul, but my mother would say to me, people in hell
want ice water.
Want ice water.
My grandma would say that to me.
I'm like, I don't even know what that means because we didn't grow up in church, but she'd say, people in hell want ice water.
But they ain't getting that either.
Okay, I don't know what that means, but so it doesn't matter what you want. Well, so don't make your foundation kind of that throwaway thing. Make sure it's built to last.
That's right. Join us here next week where we're going to be talking about standing stones, and we'll continue our series on foundations. If you enjoyed this episode of the 167, make sure you like, subscribe, follow, get notified, leave a 5-star rating and a positive review. Tell all your friends to listen as well. Make sure you go over to newlifegardener.com and check out all that we have to offer as a church, and check out our messages online as well. Thanks for listening.